There are places where the earth holds more than just soil and stone. Places where the air is heavy, not with altitude, but with memory. In the hills above Brazil, such a place exists. Hill. Not known for tourists or for legends. Known instead for death. And not just any death, but one of the most chilling, cryptic, and unresolved cases in Brazilian history. In August of 1966, 2 men were found dead on that hill. They were lying peacefully side by side, dressed in formal suits, wearing waterproof coats. But the most disturbing detail wasn't their position. It was the objects they carried on, the ones they wore. Upon their faces, lead masks, carefully crafted to cover only the eyes. In their pockets, a notebook with instructions that read more like a ritual than anything logical. No wounds, no signs of violence, no cause of death ever identified, and no answers, only questions that deepen as the decades go by. This is not a ghost story. It is a real case, documented by police, puzzled over by doctors, and dismissed by authorities, who never wanted to dig too deep. But the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. Because this case doesn't just involve death. It involves science, religion, occultism, the possibility of communication with other dimensions, and the persistent silence of 2 men who may have died chasing something beyond human comprehension. The story begins on August 17, 1966. A young boy named Jorge da Costa Alves was flying his kite on hill when he stumbled upon a disturbing scene. 2 bodies lying in the brush, neatly positioned as if placed with care. Both men appeared to be asleep. There was no blood, no struggle, no weapons. But they were very much dead. Authorities were called. What they found would set off a mystery that still defies logic to this day. The men were identified as Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel Viana, both electronics technicians from Campos dos Goytecases, a city located about 200 kilometers from. They were known to be intelligent, skilled in radio communications, and close friends. Nothing in their backgrounds hinted at mental instability or criminal activity. Yet here they were on a hill, wearing suits, raincoats, and peculiar lead masks. These masks were thick, metallic coverings molded to fit the upper portion of the face, specifically the eyes. They were homemade, yet carefully crafted. No eye holes, no straps, simply placed upon their faces, as though preparing for something they needed to protect themselves from. But what? Next to the bodies were empty water bottles, 2 towels, and a small notebook. In it, a cryptic message written in Portuguese. 1630 at the determined place. 1830 ingest capsules. After effect, protect metals, await signal mask. The handwriting was consistent with one of the men. The message made no sense. Or rather, it made too much sense to someone who wasn't there to explain it. The local police, led by investigator Bezerra, were immediately perplexed. Toxicology exams found no poison in their systems, though by the time the autopsy was conducted, the internal organs were too decomposed for certainty. The men had been dead for several days before discovery. There were no external injuries, no defensive wounds, no signs of a third party. But everything about the scene whispered of planning. The investigation revealed that the 2 men had left their city on August 17th, telling family they were heading to São Paulo to buy work equipment. They carried a large sum of money. Along the way, witnesses saw them purchase waterproof coats, and later, lead sheets, which they used to make the masks. They were also seen buying water, and what some describe as capsules, though no trace of these pills was ever found. They arrived in by bus, and were last seen by a local boy heading toward the hill in the late afternoon. From there, the timeline goes dark. They would never return. When police searched their homes, they found a small workshop, radios, coils, schematics, but also notebooks filled with symbols, references to spiritual energy, magnetic fields, and communication with entities from higher spheres. Friends later testified that Manoel and Miguel were part of a group known as scientific spiritualists, a sect that believed in combining science and mysticism to achieve enlightenment or contact with other realms. Were they trying to reach something beyond this world, or protect themselves from it? What happened on that hill remains one of Brazil's most enduring enigmas. Every piece of evidence only adds to the confusion. If they were poisoned, where is the poison? If they weren't, why did they die simultaneously, side by side, with no signs of trauma or distress? Why the masks? What signal were they waiting for? And perhaps most haunting of all, why does it feel like they succeeded? In the next part, we will explore the investigations, the alternate theories, and the growing belief that this was no accident, but a deliberate, spiritual, and possibly otherworldly event. The initial investigation, already plagued by confusion, only grew darker as more details emerged. The autopsies delayed due to bureaucratic issues, and the decomposition of the bodies yielded inconclusive results. No bullet wounds, no stabs, no strangulation. Their hearts had simply stopped. Without fresh tissue to examine, toxicological testing was unreliable, and the cause of death was officially recorded as unknown. But to many, that label was just a convenient way of closing a case no one wanted to open fully. The small notebook found beside the bodies remained the most provocative clue. Investigators fixated on the line, "ingest capsules." It suggested that the men had voluntarily taken some form of substance. But what was it? And why? There was no residue found near the bodies, no containers that could have held pills, and no known hallucinogen or drug that could kill two healthy men so quickly and leave no trace. The use of the term "protect metals" followed by a weight signal mask raised another question. Were the masks a form of shielding? From light, from radiation, from something else entirely? Reports soon surfaced of a third man, an unidentified individual believed to have been with Miguel and Manoel during the initial planning phase. According to a hotel clerk, the two men had checked in briefly and behaved nervously, looking around as if expecting someone. Some believe that third person may have provided the capsules or led the ritual. Others suggest he was meant to return, but never did. His identity remains unknown to this day. Digging deeper into the lives of Miguel and Mano revealed their deep involvement with an esoteric group known locally in Compostos Goitic, though not officially registered as a religious or scientific institution. This collective of self-styled scientific spiritualists practiced experiments involving radio frequencies, electrical fields, and metaphysical theories about the human soul and life after death. It wasn't just idle philosophy. Members conducted practical exercises constructing devices, meditating under electromagnetic exposure, attempting to communicate with spirits or extraterrestrial intelligences. For them, the boundary between science and mysticism was not a wall, it was a door. Colleagues from the group later testified that Miguel and Mano had been attempting to build a device capable of receiving signals from other planes of existence. Some said they believed a specific ritual, combined with physical preparation and mental concentration, could allow direct contact with beings beyond the material world. Whether these were spirits, aliens, or manifestations of higher consciousness remained unclear. But what is clear is this: they believed. As the press caught hold of the story, speculation ran rampant. Some newspapers ran headlines suggesting the men had committed suicide during a bizarre religious experiment. Others leaned into the supernatural, claiming it was an alien encounter gone wrong. The scene, they argued, had the makings of a contact event. An isolated location, a precise time, strange materials, and a disappearance of expected traces. Some even link the case to similar incidents across South America cases, where people were found dead under mysterious circumstances, often with metallic objects or peculiar writings. Skeptics dismissed these claims as fantasy, but skepticism failed to explain the strange local phenomena reported around the time of the deaths. Several residents living near Hill claimed they saw an intense orange glow over the hill the night the men likely died. Others spoke of loud, unexplained buzzing noises, like a pulsing hum in the sky. At the time, these accounts were treated as hearsay. Today, they are central to the enduring mystery. What is most unsettling is not the absence of answers, but the presence of deliberate planning. Miguel and Manoel did not stumble onto that hill. They climbed it with purpose, at a specific time, with specific items: suits, raincoats, towels, a notebook, and lead masks. None of it was random. All of it pointed toward an expected event. Yet what they encountered, if anything, left no mark on the earth, only on the minds of those who still try to piece together the final moments. As more time passed, the case was quietly archived. No arrests, no further investigation. The Brazilian police, facing pressure to close the file, declared the deaths unexplained but not criminal. Their families were left with nothing but grief and questions. The lead masks, collected as evidence, were eventually lost. The original photos, degraded. The hill, left undisturbed yet forever marked. But stories like this never die completely. They remain in fragments, newspaper clippings, aging reports, rumors passed down by locals. And when darkness meets uncertainty, the human imagination begins to reconstruct what evidence cannot. Some say it was a failed spiritual ritual. Others claim it was a successful one. In the next part, we will descend deeper into the theories, scientific, paranormal, conspiratorial, and examine whether these deaths were accidents or an encounter with something far beyond human comprehension. In the absence of clear answers, the void left behind by Miguel and Manoel's deaths began to fill with theory. Some of these explanations clung to science, others to mysticism, and a few danced on the edge of both. But none could be dismissed outright. Not in a case where everything visible resisted reason, and everything logical had failed to explain even the simplest question: why did they die? The most grounded theory points to an accidental overdose. According to this idea, the two men may have ingested a psychoactive substance, possibly LSD or mescaline, an attempt to induce visions or spiritual contact. Under this theory, the masks were meant to shield their eyes during some hallucinogenic state, protecting them from a bright flash, a spiritual vision, or even from radiation they believed might occur. The towels, the raincoats, the specific timing, each element fits loosely into the logic of a planned ritual experiment. But this hypothesis collapses under scrutiny. No pills were ever recovered. No remnants of containers, wrappers, or ingestion tools were found. Moreover, if the goal was to enter a visionary state, why choose a remote hill in broad daylight and carry so little with them? There were no fire-starting tools, no food, no protective shelter. Only the bare essentials, as if expecting the experience to be brief or final. Another theory focuses on electromagnetic energy. Miguel and Manoel were skilled technicians, deeply familiar with radio transmission and the manipulation of frequencies. It's been suggested that they may have attempted to build a device designed to receive or channel certain wavelengths, possibly aiming to reach other dimensions or forms of intelligence. Proponents of this idea note the reference in their notes to a signal. Some even speculate that the two were attempting to create a type of portal or, at least, open their consciousness to one. The masks, in this view, were not just shields. but instruments of tuning meant to block or absorb certain frequencies. Still, no physical device was found on the hill. If such equipment existed, it disappeared along with any trace of their final actions. Then there are the conspiracy theories, darker and more elusive. One such theory claims the two men were involved with a secret government or military experiment. Brazil, during the 1960s, was a nation under the watchful eye of both national and foreign intelligence agencies. UFO sightings were common in the region, particularly in the state of Rio de Janeiro. Some theorists believe Miguel and Manoel were recruited knowingly or not into a program designed to test human exposure to new energy technologies or mind control experiments. In this version of the story, the ritual wasn't a personal experiment, but a controlled one in which they were never meant to return. But perhaps the most persistent and unnerving theory is also the one least grounded in fact yet most faithful to the feelings the case evokes. That Miguel and Manoel succeeded. That they weren't victims of miscalculation or deception, but pioneers of something incomprehensible. Those who knew them described a growing obsession in the months before their deaths, a conviction that something awaited them beyond ordinary perception. They spoke of reaching higher vibrations, of illumination, and of a contact that would prove the limits of human understanding could be breached. If this was their goal, perhaps death was not a failure but a transition. The timing of the ritual, the lack of struggle, the peaceful placement of their bodies, it all implies consent. These were not men dragged into death. They walked toward it. But what did they see before the end? Did they experience a vision? Did they wait for a signal that never came or one that arrived, unseen by anyone else? And what if they weren't alone? In the surrounding days, several locals reported seeing bright lights in the sky. One described a floating object, hovering silently above hill, the night the men likely died. Another reported a powerful humming vibration, coming from the earth itself. These accounts, scattered and largely ignored at the time, have since become part of the mythos. They suggest that whatever happened up there was not isolated. That the ritual, or the event, was not a fabrication but part of something much larger and far more secret. In time, these stories gave birth to a different kind of theory, one less about evidence and more about possibility. That Miguel and Manoel were not just experimenting with technology or ingesting chemicals. They were preparing for contact. Whether with beings from another world or intelligences from another plane. They believed they had found a method, a frequency, a key. And on that hill, in the silence, they turned the lock. In the next part, we will examine the legacy of this case in Brazilian culture, the resurfacing of similar unexplained deaths, and how the hill itself became more than a location. It became a place of pilgrimage, fear, and questions that refused to die. There is a kind of silence that follows certain stories, a silence not born from peace, but from paralysis. The case of the lead masks is one such story. It ends not with resolution, but with a question. Not a question shouted, but whispered. Not a cry for help, but a suggestion that some answers lie outside the reach of those who ask them. We know how Miguel and Manoel died, at least in the physical sense. They lay down on a hill with no visible trauma, no trace of violence, no sign of escape or struggle. We know what they carried: towels, raincoats, lead masks, and a notebook that reads like a message meant for someone or something other than us. We know that they planned this, that it wasn't random, that they believed, and after all the investigations, all the theories, all the decades of speculation, we still do not know what they were preparing for. Were they waiting for a signal from beyond? Were they victims of delusion or participants in a ritual that succeeded in ways we cannot understand? If the answer lies in another realm, we may never reach it. And if it lies within our own, Perhaps we are simply not ready to hear it. What makes this case so haunting is not the strangeness of the evidence, but the calmness with which these men approached the unknown. There was no resistance, no attempt to flee, no panic, just preparation, intention, and then, nothing. In a world where we pride ourselves on logic, reason, and science, the lead mask's case stands like a monument to our limitations. A reminder that belief can be as powerful as proof. That two men can walk into death with open eyes and leave behind only questions carved in silence. Maybe the true horror of this story is that they weren't wrong. Maybe the ritual worked. Maybe the signal came. Or maybe the most terrifying truth is this: that they died for nothing. That there was no message, no higher plane, no voice on the other end of the frequency, only the void. But if that were the case, why do we still feel the pull of that hill? Why do we still look at their photographs, study their notes, measure their footsteps, searching for a pattern that never arrives? Because stories like these don't fade. They fester. They linger in the corners of rational thought. They creep into the empty spaces left behind by certainty. And sometimes, they change us. You've heard the facts. You've followed the path. Now the question is yours. What do you believe happened to Miguel and Manoel on Hill? Were they chasing the unknown? Or did it find them first? Leave your theory in the comments. And if you're ready to uncover the next unsolved mystery, hiding in the shadows, we'll be waiting. This was Shadow Files. Until next time.